of course, I also have to thank the organizers first for giving me the chance to speak here. And when Gino actually asked me to give a presentation with exactly that title, the title was Gino's idea, I was also, next to being honored, very pleased, because that's a topic I like to speak about a lot. I mean, we're not in the field of highest science, probably, when we go into the packaging hall of a brewery, but we are definitely in the area of the highest high-tech in a brewery. I mean, when you are in a brew house, you're talking about massive and huge cooking pots, but when you go into a packaging hall, you basically speak about everything that high-tech has to offer these days, which goes, for example, down to stroboscopic X-ray flashes with numbers of several thousands per minute and so on. That is a massive driving of our industry, all the high-tech that is going on in packaging. And in my little abstract, you might have read that I put it like, with packaging, you probably cannot win the game, but you definitely can lose it if your packaging is not under control. And that goes for very many aspects of being successful in the business, meaning you can lose a lot of costs there. You can be not so sustainable as you might want to wish for, and also, of course, you can damage the product heavily that you have produced carefully before when it is on the way to the final consumer. And one of the basic lines, or the bottom lines of my presentation, therefore, will be that whatever you do to improve with modern trends in packaging, you must never sacrifice any quality aspect of these major functions of packaging. Packaging technology is its own scientific strain out there, and there are packaging technologists that we like to work with a lot, and I took these definitions from the packaging technology itself, splitting packaging up to 8 major functions that you have, out of which some, of course, are much more eye-falling than others. I mean, protection is clear, and when we're brewers, of course, protection means protection against UV light, against oxygen ingress, CO2 escaping, and so on. And then there's also, of course, here given under secondary promotion, sales, and service, and so on. And I probably don't have to tell you about the numerous research works showing that consumers very often at the point of sale make their decision which beer they want to buy, so that there is a huge advertising influence from the packaging itself also that needs to be contributed to. So that means when I talk about challenges and trends, the challenge always is to never sacrifice quality of any of these purposes of packaging, whatever you want to do to improve. And when you look at the possibilities and trends out there trying to improve what you do in a packaging hall, then of course there's numerous. And as I only also have 20 minutes, I want to go for examples out of 3 major trends that are out there. One is, of course, driving every industry today, and that's sustainability. But moreover, or additionally to that, we find a huge trend for individualization in beverage packaging. And of course, as we are, most of us are industrial brewers, efficiency is a topic that cannot be overestimated. And when it comes to trying to be more sustainable in packaging, then the next presenter coming after me will make a huge point there, so I can be relatively quick on that. But I've brought you a few examples of how people try to improve their sustainability performance or footprint or whatever you want to call it. Like, for example, cutting down on water consumption. Water is a huge factor, not only in costs, but of course also with global perspective. And one of the examples where a lot of water is lost in traditional packaging halls, I would say, is the lubrication of the conveyor belts. Probably everybody who has been in a packaging hall knows these pictures of huge puddles covered with white foam looking like mountainsides in winter, really, and that visualizes very nicely that you lose a lot there. So people have been striving to improve that situation for years, and one of the alternatives that has been coming up or has been implemented in the market is dry lubrication. That means bringing up a sort of powdery lubricant that is doing its purpose without using too much water. And Put that short, there are applications where this functions and works very well, but it doesn't do so in many applications, especially in the brewing world. Reason being, for example, when you cut down on the water consumption in lubrication, you will find out pretty soon that the water in the belt lubrication is not only lubing the bottles on the conveyor belts, but also joints and fast-moving parts, so that you have much more wearing and run into damages pretty easy and early once the lubricating water is not present anymore. Another thing is that people figured out or found out the hard way very often that the water in wet lubrication also has cleaning efficiencies. That means it cleans the belts, it improves the hygienic conditions of your packaging hall, and you only notice that when you cut down on that water. So one of the things that you see popping up in almost every bigger brewery these days is what people like to call lubrication with an optimized or minimized water consumption, where spraying on lubricants with longer pauses in between is being practiced, and that is something that you can adjust to the specific needs of your specific bottling hall, and people report of water savings up to 70%. Only in the lubrication. And as you can adjust it very nicely to your needs, you will not run into the problems that I've indicated before. Pasteurization is something that people would like to cut down on if they only could and if they only dared. And many people go for substituting tunnel pasteurization with flash pasteurization because that is better for the product and it also costs way less energy to do so. The problem, of course, is that tunnel pasteurization pasteurizes the final package. That means you do not have any danger anymore of microbes that might be spoilers coming into the product. Whereas when you flash pasteurize, the packaging process, the filling process itself, is another risky point where you might run into a contamination. So that this is something that some people, in some environments especially, simply don't dare doing. But if you look into that, then another alternative is coming up these days with big steps, I want to say. It's not totally new, but it is a technology that is driven very much these days, and that is pasteurization replacement. That means not using heat anymore for removing possible germs, but doing sterile filtration. And that will, of course, have its own challenges, but looking at it from the energy consumption perspective, that is probably something that many people would like to go for. And another big thing that we see in packaging these days is lightweighting. Lightweighting of almost every packaging material you can imagine. For crown corks, it's something that almost every big brewing group these days is already in the process. We're talking about metal thicknesses in crown corks usually of around 0.2 millimeters, and people have improved the performance of thinner plates so much that a 0.18 is already in the range of being normal, I would say, and goes down to 0.16 to 0.15. And if you consider that a crown cork is, as a single entity, of course, only a small piece of metal, but if you use 50,000 per hour every single day of the year, then of course you're talking about tons of metal that can be saved. And if you want to calculate that, for example, into a CO2 footprint or something, that will give you a pretty strong advantage there. Bottles are also being lightweighted a lot, but the problem with lightweighting bottles is if it is a glass bottle and you fill in a carbonized beverage, then the old saying of a chain only being as strong as the weakest link becomes important again, because if you lightweight a bottle and the thickness of the material varies, then it'll have a tendency to break pretty early. And we do a lot packaging testing at VLB, and we see that many lightweighted bottles, if they are not constructed correctly, do not fulfill the requirements of filling in carbonated beverages, at least not at a safe range. So that is something where you do have to follow up very intensely on. For PET, it's obvious. I don't know if anybody of you goes to discounters buying mineral water, for example. If you look at how little material is being used in PET bottles for these sorts of beverages, that is really amazing. I would say in the last 10 years, we have probably gone down to less than half of the material in PET bottles than we've used before. For beer, that is not as easy because we have a lot of requirements to fulfill in terms of gas permeation, and more material simply helps you there. There are solutions out there with which you can use very little PET and still be good in the permeation performance, but that's of course costly. So when it comes to lightweighting PET bottles for beer, you're probably meeting limits somewhere. And my third example that I'm mentioning here is a development that will probably be of huge importance in the next years, and that's hard glass. There are people out there producing glass, simply speaking, with using more thermal stress during the production so that the glass itself becomes way more resistant than traditional glass would be. I've seen advertising movies where people take bottles and drop them out of this height and they simply bounce back up again and do not break. And if you have a material that is that hard, then of course this will make a big leap possible in lightweighting again. So there's a lot of stuff going on into that direction. And this is, of course, going hand in hand also with another big thing, and that is individualization. Excuse me, I brought a German example here, but I saw the beer style being mentioned in the previous presentations, Kölsch, out of Cologne in Germany, a very special market because a big city is drinking one beer style only. You can really count the numbers of bottles, single bottles, of other beer brands being sold in Cologne. Everybody drinks Kölsch. So there are a few Kölsch breweries out there, and then one of these guys had a very simple idea, replacing the brown bottle against a white, transparent one. They claim here being the first to use clear glass bottles, and it was reported that this change alone, from going from brown to white, made a plus in sales of more than 10%, because the consumers suddenly saw, hey, there is one brand that's different from the others. And that's when they went for it, buying it like crazy, really. And this goes on. In returnable bottles markets, in Germany especially, but also in other markets, you can have pool bottles. That means bottles that all the users can share. It's an open pool, and it's coming from the return system from the retailers into the breweries, and you simply wash off the old label and use it for your bottling plant again. And that used to be massive in Germany. Almost 90%, I think, of the beer was once packaged in pool bottles. But this is not the case anymore because everybody wants to individualize, and so-called individual bottles are popping up everywhere. I've brought you one example here. This, a small brewer, but this is an example for a typical pool bottle as we would use it in Germany. And here a big German brewer going for something similar, but slightly different. You see here is an embossing, that means writing in the glass, and you have this slim shape here. But the bottles fit in the same crates, and they are in the same return system. That means there is a whole new industry that has been developed in Germany, which is doing nothing else but sorting bottles and then selling this as a service to brewers so that the brewer can get their own bottles back and not polluted with foreign individual bottles. And that's a real industry. There are people doing nothing else but bottle sorting. So there's a big influence of individualization, and here is a Coke example. Of course, Coke being, for good reasons, one of the biggest in this specific market, had the idea of going for maximized individualization. This, of course, appeals very much to the consumer. And again, excuse me, I made this screenshot from the German internet site of Coke, but this here is a page or a site in the internet where you can order your bottle with your name, and then you're simply only being asked how many bottles do you want to have, and then they are being sent over to you. This is, of course, something where you can make a so strong connection with the consumer that this is something that we will see probably a lot, and this links very nicely to something that has been published quite a while before, but now with a Belgian brewery using it pretty strongly, will probably make its step really into the brewing industry, and that is direct printing. That means no labels, but with an inkjet technology, really, you would print your label on the bottle in the packaging process. And I will come back to the challenges of this technology, but the advantages that you can achieve here are obvious. I mean, if you can print bottles individually, and KHS, for example, has published numbers that they can do 35,000 an hour in one line. That means that's industrial scale. And they can make every bottle look differently. That means if you would apply the Coca-Cola idea here, that everybody can order their specific bottles, that would be a real thing, I would say, for many consumers, having their special own bottles. And the other thing is, this opens doors for marketing that are huge. Like, for example, when a local football club wins the national championship, then the local brewery can, 1 hour after the match is over, flood the market with the championship bottle or the championship can or something like that, and then bring up every player so that everybody can collect the bottles and so on. So this is something that probably we'll see in huge scale. And this already makes the door open to one of the big things that we will see in the coming future, and that is, of course, Industry 4.0. The Internet of Things, as it is also often called. Here I've written down what 4.0 means. It's the fourth industrial revolution, implementing cyber-physical systems, the Internet of Things, where machines, workpieces, and systems are connected in an intelligent network, and they communicate and improve processes. If you imagine that for the direct printing, then this is obviously where we're going to see that probably first in the brewery. And the opportunities of that are huge. I have read that Harley-Davidson, this motorcycle company, who sell a lot of customized motorcycles, that means everybody wants to have their own Harley-Davidson, and with an approach according to this idea, they have cut down their production time of a customized motorcycle from several days to several hours. So that means the advantages also for the people using such approaches are obvious. And for that reason, and this example, I think we will see that coming up. Only that I owe you, of course, when we talk about direct printing, the challenges of that technology so far. It's a new technology, we don't have long-term experience, but there is a lot of stuff, of course, to be kept in mind, like migration of the ink. In the example of Martens, you can see that they advertise their system already with low migration ink. So that is something where, of course, people might have concern what is going through the PET into the product. So they need special inks to be developed that do not migrate. Metallic colors are, at this point in time, difficult to manage in this inkjet technology. That means if you have a name of a company, a label that involves metallic colors, like SAB, for example. SAB is a golden letter print. That is difficult to achieve because metallic colors are simply by technology difficult to handle here. And so on and so on. But I'm thinking that that is something that we will see a lot coming up. And the last point I want to mention is, of course, that everybody has efficiency of their bottling halls way on top of their lists. And for that reason, everybody calculates different numbers for efficiencies. Internationally seen, the most common one is the overall equipment efficiency number here. But actually, as far as I see it, every company has their own way of calculating that. And then they boast, I have 95%, how can you do that? 80 are only possible. And difficult, but everybody has these figures on their list and tries to optimize that. And what I see personally there is that people apply technology to achieve that. That is unheard of at least 10 years ago. Like, they X-ray stuff, they use high-speed cameras, they use acoustic cameras, they use whatever to only be able to keep up the highest possible efficiency of their bottling lines, which then goes also into almost religious systems, like for example TPM. You probably all know TPM, Total Productive Maintenance, which is something, it's only a system, a setup structure of especially bottling halls to try and optimize the output. But sometimes this really goes into a way where people start with a huddle in the morning, we're the best, we can do it, and yay, let's go into the bottling hall. So this is something that I see especially internationally a lot. In South America, for example, you see TPM bottling halls a lot. And when you enter, the first thing that you see are colorful pictures and diagrams of how good which machine is, which of course, for me, implements also a danger, because everybody can spot the persons that bring the utilization of their plants down, and that might be psychologically and socially a little difficult. But still, that's a trend that I would say will only increase, because the beneficial aspect to it is huge. And what I put down here is, that is of course gathering information, and we've seen yesterday in Jerome's presentation that big data is also something that will play a big role, and that is something where we of course are going here also. Learning, measuring and counting, and then out of that gaining the best possible efficiency up to numbers unheard of a few years ago. And I'm done at that point, and I hope I stayed in time. Thank you for your kind attention.
All those the things here to optimize bottling plants, that's all good for the big breweries, but what about all those smaller ones? And do you see any trend of maybe thinking about the central bottling plant, so that a lot of craft brewers could take use of those things, which are then optimized?
Yep. Yes, of course, very good question, and that has been done in the past, but it at least according to my experience, never worked well for long periods of times, because there is hardly anything that is so difficult to foresee like a packaging plan. Packaging plans will shift from day to day and from week to week, and if there is one bottling line that three persons try to share, that is very difficult. And the examples that we at least have seen in Germany didn't last long for that reason, really.